High in the forgotten reaches of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a boy of 11 stands beside a weathered gas station, his threadbare backpack clutched against his chest like a shield. Thomas watches the sun sink behind distant peaks, the afternoon light fading to dusky purple as cars occasionally rumble past on the rural highway. 6 hours have passed since his mother left him with $20 and a promise to return. "In just a few minutes, honey." The words echo in his mind, growing hollower with each passing hour. Inside the fluorescent-lit convenience store, the clerk, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes and worry lines, makes another call, her voice hushed but carrying through the open door. "Yes, that's right. Been here since noon. Mother just drove off." No, he won't say much, poor thing. Thomas knows what comes next. He's overheard enough. Social services, police reports, emergency placement. Words that translate to strangers deciding his fate, to system and processing, to being labeled abandoned. His fingers trace the worn $20 bill in his pocket, his mother's final gift. The evening air carries the scent of pine and distant rain as Thomas edges toward the side of the building. The clerk's back is turned, her attention focused on the telephone conversation that will set machinery in motion that cannot be stopped. His heart hammers against his ribs as he slips around the corner, then breaks into a run. Sneakers pounding against asphalt, then gravel, then finally the soft earth of the forest edge. He doesn't stop until the gas station's lights are mere fireflies in the distance. Only then does Thomas pause, lungs burning, legs trembling beneath him. The forest surrounds him now, ancient trees standing sentinel as night creatures begin their chorus. Reality settles over him like the darkness. He is alone. Truly alone. From his pocket, he withdraws the crumpled bill, studying George Washington's impassive face in the fading light. His mother's words replay, "Get yourself something to eat if you get hungry. I'll be right back." The memory of her fingers lingering on his for that final moment. The strange sadness in her eyes that didn't match her casual smile. Had she known even then, she wouldn't return. The first tears come silently, tracking clean paths down his dirt-smudged face. Thomas wipes them away with grimy knuckles, forcing back the sob building in his chest. Crying won't help. Nothing will help except moving forward. The mountains rise before him, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Somewhere in those ancient ridges and valleys he might find shelter, anonymity, escape from the system that would swallow him whole. With nowhere else to go, Thomas turns his face toward the wilderness and takes his first step away from the world that has discarded him. The vastness of his abandonment settling into his bones like a cold that may never leave. Rain patters against the plastic tarp Thomas scavenged from behind an auto repair shop just before nightfall. The translucent blue sheeting, weathered and stained with oil spots, forms a meager tent against the gathering storm. Huddled beneath this fragile shelter, Thomas wraps his arms around drawn-up knees, shivering as water finds paths through tiny tears in the plastic. The darkness around him feels absolute, broken only by occasional distant headlights sweeping across the trees from the highway. He can no longer see but knows lies somewhere behind him. Each unfamiliar sound startles him awake, just as exhaustion begins to pull him under. The crack of branches beneath nocturnal creatures, the mournful call of an owl, the rustling of leaves in wind that carries whispers he can't quite decipher. Sleep comes in fitful bursts, more like momentary escapes than true rest. His dreams are fragmented scenes of his mother's face, the gas station's fluorescent glow, the clerk's pitying eyes. He wakes each time with a jolt, momentarily confused before reality crashes back. He is alone, truly alone, for the first time in his 11 years. The rain continues through the night, sometimes gentle, sometimes driving hard enough that Thomas must hold the tarp's edges to prevent it from blowing away. His clothes grow damp despite his efforts, and cold seeps into his bones. He thinks of warm beds, hot meals, simple comforts that seemed unremarkable just yesterday. Dawn arrives with unexpected gentleness, pale light filtering through morning mist that hangs between the trees. Thomas emerges from his makeshift shelter, muscles stiff and protesting after hours, curled against the cold ground. The forest around him takes shape in the growing light, towering oaks, thick underbrush, and beyond them, the blue haze silhouettes of mountains rising in the distance like silent guardians. His stomach growls painfully, reminding him he hasn't eaten since the vending machine chips at the gas station. Thomas kneels and carefully empties his backpack, taking inventory of everything he possesses in the world. The $20 bill, now carefully folded in his front pocket, a red pocket knife with his grandfather's initials scratched into the handle, a half-empty plastic water bottle, a dog-eared paperback adventure novel about wilderness survival that seems suddenly, ironically relevant, and the clothes on his back, jeans, sneakers, t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket, inadequate for mountain nights. Not much to build a life from. Thomas drinks sparingly from the water bottle, the liquid barely taking the edge off his thirst. He studies the mountains thoughtfully, considering his options. Towns mean questions he can't answer, authorities who would place him in the system. But those distant ridges and valleys offer anonymity, perhaps abandoned structures where a boy might disappear. Thomas had read once about mountain folk who lived off the grid, beholden to no one. Something about that independence calls to him now with promises of freedom, if he can survive long enough to find shelter. Repacking his meager possessions, Thomas sets his face toward the mountains and begins walking, each step carrying him further from civilization and deeper into an uncertain future that, whatever its hardships, will be of his own choosing. 3 days into his journey, Thomas's hunger becomes a constant companion, sharper than the evening chill that settles into his bones as the sun dips behind the mountains. His $20 dwindled quickly. Cheap food at a gas station, a second-hand jacket when the nights grew too cold, matches after his attempts to start fire with friction failed. The roadside diner appears like a mirage through the trees, its neon sign flickering weakly against the twilight. Thomas approaches cautiously, drawn by the rich smells wafting from the kitchen exhaust, but wary of adult eyes that might ask difficult questions. He circles to the back where dumpsters stand like sentinels beside a loading door and begins his careful search for discarded treasures. That's when he sees it. A scrawny, medium-sized dog with one torn ear, frantically pawing at discarded fast food containers. The dog freezes at Thomas's approach, hackles raised, eyes reflecting a wariness born from hard experience. Thomas recognizes that look. He's seen it in his own reflection in still creek waters. Not aggression, but caution, the defensive posture of the abandoned. Without thinking, Thomas unwraps the half-eaten burger he'd scavenged moments before. His stomach protests as he tears off a generous portion and places it on the ground between them, then steps back, sitting on an overturned milk crate. "Go on," he whispers, his voice rough from disuse. "I know what it's like." The dog watches him, intelligent eyes assessing the offering and the boy. Seconds stretch into minutes. Finally, hunger outweighs caution. The dog approaches with deliberate movements, never taking its eyes off Thomas. It snatches the food and retreats, but only a few feet before devouring it in 3 desperate gulps. Thomas takes a bite of his own portion, the two of them eating in strangely comfortable silence. When finished, the dog tilts its head, studying Thomas with an intensity that feels like recognition. Something passes between them, an understanding beyond words, a recognition of shared circumstance. When Thomas stands and gathers his backpack, the dog follows at a careful distance. By nightfall, as Thomas makes camp in a small clearing, the distance has closed to arm's length. In the glow of his small fire, Thomas notices the reddish-brown tint to the dog's matted fur. "Rusty," he says aloud, testing the name. The dog's good ear twitches, almost acknowledging the christening. Thomas sleeps restlessly that night, until a weight settles against his back, warm and solid. Rusty's body curls perfectly into the hollow of Thomas's side, their shared warmth driving back the mountain chill. For the first time in days, Thomas feels the crushing weight of solitude lift slightly. In the darkness, he finds himself whispering into Rusty's good ear, his fears about tomorrow, memories of yesterday, questions about his mother that have no answers. The dog listens with unwavering attention, occasionally nudging Thomas's hand with his nose as if in encouragement. When sleep finally claims him, Thomas dreams not of abandonment, but of possibilities. 2 souls discarded by the world have found each other in the vastness of the wilderness. It isn't much, perhaps, but it is a beginning, the first fragile thread of connection in what will become something stronger than either of them could build alone. Thomas and Rusty push deeper into the mountains, following game trails that wind through ancient forests where sunlight filters in dappled patterns across the forest floor. At a small campground, Thomas trades his dog-eared novel for a worn guidebook on edible plants, studying illustrations by firelight each evening until he can confidently identify blackberries from nightshade, morels from deathcaps. Rusty proves himself invaluable, his keen senses alerting Thomas to approaching strangers long before they appear, his hunting instincts occasionally yielding a rabbit or squirrel that Thomas learns to skin and cook over carefully built fires. Weeks blend into months as summer warmth transforms the landscape. The mountains reveal their secrets slowly, hidden springs with water sweeter than any Thomas has tasted, meadows bursting with wild flowers, ridgelines offering views that make his heart swell with unexpected belonging. Thomas's body changes through necessity. Stream crossings and ridge climbs build strength in once skinny limbs. The sun darkens his skin, lightens his hair. His hands, once soft from pencils and video game controllers, develop calluses from gathering firewood, building lean-tos, setting snares. Each night, he and Rusty sleep beneath rudimentary shelters of pine boughs and salvaged plastic, the dog's warmth against his side more comforting than any bed he remembers. Late summer brings violent storms that sweep across the mountains with terrifying speed. One afternoon, dark clouds gather suddenly, transforming day to twilight. Lightning splits the sky as thunder cracks directly overhead, sending Rusty pressing anxiously against Thomas's legs. Rain follows in sheets that quickly overwhelm their makeshift shelter, turning the ground beneath them to mud. "We need something better," Thomas shouts over the downpour, gathering their few possessions. Rusty leads the way, nose to ground, following a faint trail barely visible beneath years of undergrowth. The path climbs steadily, before opening suddenly into a clearing. Through the curtain of rain, Thomas sees it, a small cabin weathered gray with age. Its roof sags dangerously on one side, windows gape empty or broken, the front door hangs from a single hinge. Yet something in the sight makes Thomas's breath catch. He and Rusty approach cautiously, stepping onto a porch that creaks ominously beneath their weight. Thomas pushes the door wider, peering into musty darkness that smells of abandonment and forgotten dreams. Despite cobwebs in corners and leaves blown through broken windows, despite mouse droppings and the distant drip of rain through ceiling holes, Thomas feels something unexpected unfurling in his chest, not just relief at finding shelter, but recognition. In this dilapidated structure, forgotten by the world just as he has been, Thomas sees not what is, but what could be. Possibility. The cabin reveals itself as a time capsule of abandonment, dusty furniture covered with yellowed sheets, cobwebs stretching between ceiling beams like forgotten tapestries. Thomas steps carefully across warped floorboards, each creak echoing through the stillness as Rusty investigates corners, nose working furiously at decades of sense layered like history. Shelves line one wall, holding mason jars with faded labels, their contents long since spoiled but telling stories of someone's careful harvesting and preservation. Tools hang on rusted nails, a hammer, handsaw, various implements Thomas recognizes from school projects, but never used for true survival. In what must be the kitchen, a cast-iron pot, bellied stove stands cold, a thin layer of ash visible through its grate, suggesting fires extinguished long ago. Thomas opens cabinets cautiously, discovering chipped plates, dented cookware, simple things that transform the abstract concept of shelter into something that once was genuinely home. A calendar nailed beside the single window has August 1967 permanently displayed, its curling edges marking the last recorded moment of habitation. In the small bedroom, a wooden trunk rests at the foot of a stripped mattress. Thomas hesitates before lifting its lid, feeling like an intruder despite the obvious abandonment. Inside, he finds neatly folded clothing, flannel shirts, heavy work pants, all sized for a man much larger than himself. Beneath them lie several leather-bound journals and a metal box containing faded photographs of people Thomas doesn't recognize. A bearded man standing proudly before the cabin when it was new, the same man beside a smiling woman on the porch, their hands clasped. The journals reveal precise handwriting documenting weather patterns, hunting successes, observations of wildlife, the mundane yet profound details of a solitary life, embraced rather than endured. Thomas reads random entries until fading light makes it impossible, learning fragments about the man who built this refuge by choice, not necessity. Outside, the storm continues unabated, rain finding new paths through the damaged roof. Thomas clears a corner least affected by leaks, sweeping away years of dust and debris with a branch fashioned into a crude broom. Rusty watches from the doorway, occasionally shaking his coat, sending water droplets flying. When Thomas finally settles onto the floor, his backpack serving as pillow, Rusty joins him immediately, their shared body heat creating the first true comfort either has known in weeks. The rain drums a hypnotic rhythm against what remains of the roof. Despite the holes letting in occasional drips, despite the musty smell and the knowledge that countless repairs await, Thomas feels something like peace settling over him. For the first time since the gas station, he allows himself to think beyond mere survival to something resembling a future. "We'll stay," he whispers to Rusty, who acknowledges this momentous decision with a soft thump of tail against the floor. "We'll make this ours." Thomas awakens to shafts of sunlight streaming through holes in the cabin roof, dust motes dancing in golden beams that illuminate the enormity of the task before him. For a moment he lies still, Rusty's warm weight pressed against his side, mentally cataloging priorities with a clarity that surprises him. Water first, then shelter, then food. The hierarchy of survival needs he remembers from a classroom lesson that now means the difference between life and death. He rises quietly, Rusty immediately alert at his side, and begins methodically exploring their new domain in daylight. The cabin's remote location suggests a water source nearby. No one would build this far into the mountains without one. Following a barely discernible path behind the structure, Thomas discovers a spring-fed stream 100 yards away, water bubbling over stones with a clarity that makes his parched throat ache. He kneels, drinking carefully, then fills the plastic bottle from his pack. Returning to the cabin, Thomas sorts through debris, setting aside anything potentially useful, a tarp with only minor tears, nails pulled straight from rotted boards, a hammer with a cracked handle but solid head. From his guidebook, he recalls illustrations of rain catchment systems. Using the tarp, some salvaged wire, and a dented pot found in the kitchen, Thomas creates a crude funnel system beneath the worst of the roof leaks. Rusty stays close throughout the day, seeming to understand the importance of their work, occasionally bringing Thomas sticks as if offering to help with repairs. The dog's company transforms what would be lonely labor into shared purpose, his attentive presence a constant reminder of why this matters. They are building something together, a sanctuary against abandonment. By afternoon, Thomas has cleared enough debris to create a workable living space in the cabin's sturdiest corner. Using a broom fashioned from bound twigs, he sweeps away years of dust and mouse droppings, then spreads the cleanest blanket he can find from the trunk over the bare floorboards. The work is exhausting, his muscles unaccustomed to such sustained effort, but the progress, however modest, fills him with quiet satisfaction. As dusk approaches, Thomas uses his pocket knife to whittle makeshift plugs for the most egregious gaps in the walls, stuffing others with moss gathered from nearby trees. The repairs are rudimentary at best, but when a brief evening shower passes through, their corner remains relatively dry, the first victory in what will be a long campaign. That night, stretched out on their improvised bed with Rusty curled against him, Thomas sleeps more soundly than he has since his abandonment. His dreams are no longer filled with the gas station's fluorescent glare or his mother's retreating figure, but with images of what this forgotten cabin could become. A roof made whole, walls sealed against winter winds, a garden plot cleared from the overgrown clearing. For the first time, Thomas dreams not of what he has lost, but of what he might create. The first month transforms them both. Thomas wakes each morning with the sun, body sore but mind clearer than it's been since the gas station. He establishes methodical explorations, mapping their surroundings in a notebook fashioned from blank pages torn from the previous owner's journals. Each day yields new discoveries: a blackberry patch on the southern slope, mushrooms growing in dappled shade that match the safe illustrations in his guidebook, game trails where rabbits pass at dawn and dusk. Thomas follows a crumbling path behind the cabin to discover a small outbuilding nearly swallowed by kudzu and morning glory vines. Inside, hanging from rusted nails, he finds forgotten treasures: a splitting axe, handsaws, hammers, tools whose specific purposes he doesn't know, but whose solid weight promises possibility. Each one becomes precious beyond measure, irreplaceable links to a world that built rather than merely survived. The cabin yields to Thomas's determined efforts, inch by stubborn inch. He spends one entire day clearing the chimney, working from sunrise until his arms tremble with exhaustion, face and clothes blackened with ancient soot. The reward comes that evening: a small fire that draws properly, filling the cabin with warmth instead of smoke. Roof repairs follow, using boards salvaged from less essential interior walls. His hands blister, then bleed, then gradually toughen. Thomas finds fishing line tangled in a drawer, fashions a crude pole from a straight branch, and spends frustrating hours at the stream before understanding how to cast, where shadows conceal trout, the patience required. Rusty watches from the bank, occasionally drinking or splashing through shallows, but always returning to maintain silent vigil, as if understanding the importance of this skill. When Thomas finally lands a modest trout, the dog's tail wags with shared triumph. That night, they feast on fresh fish cooked over their fire, Thomas carefully removing bones before sharing morsels with his companion. The overgrown yard surrenders to Thomas's improvised tools: a hoe fashioned from a broken shovel, a rake created from bent nails driven through a board. He uncovers remnants of a previous garden, soil still rich beneath the tangle of weeds. Though summer wanes, Thomas clears a small plot, more for practice than production, turning the earth, as he's seen in illustrations. When daily tasks end, when the western sky blooms purple and gold beyond the mountains, Thomas settles before the fire with the journals. By flickering light, he studies the careful handwriting of the cabin's previous owner, absorbing observations about weather patterns, wild plant cycles, and game habits. The man's solitude wasn't desperation, but choice. Each entry reveals knowledge earned through years of deliberate living in harmony with the mountains. Thomas reads until firelight fades, Rusty's steady breathing beside him a counterpoint to the night sounds filtering through imperfect walls. Each entry becomes another thread connecting him to this place, each skill mastered another step away from mere survival towards something that might, with time and effort, resemble belonging. Autumn paints the mountains in brilliant hues, crimson maples, golden oaks, the deep bronze of dying ferns. But Thomas recognizes the beauty as warning. Winter approaches, and his knowledge of true cold comes only from books and classroom lessons, not lived experience. The previous owner's journals become his survival guide, pages turned so often that their corners have softened beneath his fingers. First frost typically arrives mid-October, one entry reads. Snow follows within weeks. By December, the path to town becomes impassable until spring thaw. Thomas works with newfound urgency, the sun's lower arc marking shortened days. He splits wood until his palms blister and re-blister, creating a stockpile that grows steadily against the cabin's northern wall. The journals detail preservation methods that seem alien until Thomas attempts them, drying late berries on screens in the sun, smoking fish over green wood fires to extend their keeping. His attempts are imperfect, but improving with each try. The garden's last tomatoes, grown from ancient seeds discovered in a mason jar, succumb to the season's first frost. Thomas harvests them green, wrapping each in newspaper as the journal suggests, storing them in the cabin's coolest corner. Every evening brings new tasks, stuffing cracks between logs with moss and mud, layering stones around the cabin's base to block crawl spaces where winter wind might penetrate, patching the roof where summer repairs have already begun to fail. Thomas fashions crude snowshoes from flexible branches and leather strips cut from an old belt, following diagrams sketched in the journals. His first attempts collapse under his weight, but the fourth pair holds promise. Travel becomes essential even in deepest winter, the journal warns. A man trapped entirely is a man who perishes. Rusty seems to sense the changing season instinctively, his summer coat thickening, his hunting becoming more determined. He brings rabbits more frequently, standing guard as Thomas clumsily skins them, pride evident in his posture. At night, Thomas reads by firelight, memorizing passages about winter dangers, the difference between frostbite and hypothermia, how to recognize safe ice on the stream, methods to prevent the cabin door from freezing shut. The tasks seem endless, the preparation inadequate, his knowledge fragmented. Despite exhaustion, Thomas's sleep grows restless as temperatures drop. His dreams fill with snowdrifts higher than the cabin roof, winds that find every imperfection in his repairs, food stores depleted before February's arrival. Yet, alongside this dread grows something unexpected: determination. Each log split, each crack sealed, each food item preserved becomes proof that he is more than abandoned, more than victim. The mountains will test him soon with cold beyond his imagination, but the cabin stands more solid now than when they found it. And Thomas himself has changed too, body hardened, hands calloused, mind focused on the challenges ahead rather than the past that drove him here. The first snow falls silently overnight, blanketing the world in pristine white that transforms familiar landmarks into mysterious shapes by dawn's pale light. Thomas stands in the cabin doorway, breath clouding before him, struck by the absolute stillness that has descended upon their mountain. The trees, the clearing, the path to the stream, all have disappeared beneath uniform whiteness that stretches unbroken to the horizon. In this crystalline moment, the completeness of their isolation settles into Thomas's bones. No footprints mar the snow beyond their doorway. No smoke rises from distant chimneys. No one in the world knows they exist here. No one is coming to look for them. Rusty pushes past him, momentarily transformed into a puppy as he bounds through drifts, disappearing completely only to explode upward in a shower of powdery crystals, tongue lolling in what appears to be joy. Thomas can't help but smile, despite the weight of responsibility pressing down. Inside, he counts their supplies again. Wood stacked to ceiling height along one wall, preserved berries and meat in careful portions. The last vegetables from their garden experiment. Will it be enough? Their routine shifts with the season. Morning excursions grow shorter, limited by daylight and the energy required to wade through knee-deep snow. Evenings stretch longer. Thomas reading aloud from the journals by firelight, Rusty curled attentively at his feet. A persistent cough develops in Thomas's chest, worsened by the cabin's lingering dampness despite the fire's constant warmth. He treats it with pine needle tea, as the journal suggests, the bitter liquid soothing his throat temporarily. Game grows scarce as December deepens. Their food stores dwindle faster than Thomas calculated. One morning, driven by hunger neither can ignore, Rusty disappears into the snow-laden forest. Hours pass, Thomas's worry mounting with each one. When the dog finally returns, exhausted and frost-covered, a rabbit hangs limp from his jaws. An offering carried for miles through impossible conditions. Thomas kneels in the snow, accepting this gift with tears freezing on his cheeks, arms thrown around Rusty's neck in wordless gratitude. That night, as they share the precious meat, Thomas realizes they have become something more than boy and dog, something closer to family forged by shared struggle. Their days fill with a silence deeper than Thomas has ever known, broken only by the wind's mournful song through pine boughs and the occasional distant howl that makes Rusty's ears prick attentively. In these moments, Thomas places a reassuring hand on the dog's head, both of them finding comfort in the knowledge that whatever lurks in the winter forest, they face it together. Two solitary souls who have somehow, against all odds, become each other's home. Mid-winter, the axe slips on frozen oak with a sickening whisper of metal on ice-crusted wood. Thomas feels the blade bite deep into his thigh before pain registers, before he even realizes his mistake. For one suspended moment, he simply stares in confusion at the crimson stain spreading across his threadbare jeans. Then agony crashes through him, buckling his knees as the snow around his boots blooms brilliant red. Rusty's alarmed bark seems distant, muffled by the sudden roaring in Thomas's ears. Using the axe handle as a makeshift crutch, he drags himself toward the cabin, each movement sending fresh waves of pain radiating from the wound. Blood trails behind him, shockingly vivid against pristine white. Rusty circles anxiously, whining high and continuous, occasionally nudging Thomas forward when his strength falters. Inside, Thomas collapses onto his sleeping mat, fingers fumbling with cloth strips torn from an old shirt. He manages a crude bandage before darkness crowds the edges of his vision. Fever follows with merciless swiftness. Days blur together, marked only by brief moments of clarity amid delirious dreams. Thomas's mother returns in these fevered visions, sometimes sitting beside him with cool hands on his forehead, sometimes standing in the doorway with suitcases packed. The cabin transforms around him, walls becoming those of his childhood bedroom, then melting away entirely to leave him exposed on a mountainside. Most strangely, Rusty speaks to him in these dreams, his gruff voice carrying ancient wisdom. "You must live, boy. We are not finished yet." Throughout his delirium, one constant remains, Rusty's physical presence. The dog never leaves his side, pressing close against his shivering body during the coldest nights, occasionally licking his face when fever burns hottest. When lucidity finally returns, Thomas discovers a miracle beside his sleeping mat, a deer haunch, impossibly large compared to Rusty's size, yet bearing unmistakable tooth marks where the dog has dragged it. How such a small dog managed this feat through deep snow remains a mystery Thomas will never solve. The meat, partially frozen and thus preserved, sustains them through the weeks of Thomas's slow recovery. Each day brings incremental improvement, sitting up, standing briefly, finally walking with a makeshift crutch fashioned from a forked branch. The wound heals gradually, leaving a jagged scar that will forever mark this winter of proving. One evening, as they share the last of the precious venison, Thomas runs his fingers over the raised ridge of new skin beneath his patched jeans. The injury has taught him a truth about their existence here. There is no margin for error, no safety net beyond each other. His survival depends entirely on Rusty, just as the dog's depends on him. They are no longer merely companions, but something more essential, two halves of a whole that can only survive together. This knowledge settles into Thomas's bones alongside the deep cold of winter, becoming foundation rather than fear. Late winter brings unexpected footprints in fresh snow, a deliberate trail approaching the cabin that Thomas discovers at dawn. His heart hammers against his ribs as he peers through frost-edged window panes, Rusty pressed against his leg, a continuous low growl rumbling through the dog's chest. Minutes stretch painfully until a figure emerges from the tree line, an elderly man in well-worn hunting clothes, moving with the deliberate ease of someone who belongs in these mountains. Thomas retreats from the window, hand falling to the hunting knife he keeps always at his belt now. Rusty positions himself between Thomas and the door, hackles raised, teeth bared in silent warning. 3 sharp knocks echo through the cabin. "Hello, inside," calls a weathered voice. "Don't mean any harm. Just checking the old Wilson place." When Thomas doesn't answer, the voice continues, "I can see smoke from your chimney, son. I'm not leaving till I know you're all right in there." Something in the tone, concern without demand, compels Thomas to crack the door. Rusty, still rigid at his side. The man stands at a respectful distance, hands raised empty before him, eyes taking in Thomas's too thin frame and the protective dog. "Name's Henry Williams," he says simply. "Known this cabin since Jacob Wilson built it back in '58. Been checking on it since he passed. The man's gaze is direct but not unkind. Didn't expect to find anybody making use of it, especially not through winter." Thomas says nothing but opens the door wider. Henry enters slowly, respecting the growling dog's authority. From his pack, he produces unexpected treasures, coffee in a tin, salt wrapped in waxed paper, bullets that match exactly the rifle Thomas found beneath the cabin's single bed but couldn't use. Henry asks few direct questions, seemingly understanding Thomas's need for privacy. Yet his conversation reveals careful observation. The healing wound on Thomas's leg, the dwindling firewood, the boy's persistent cough. Before departing, Henry spends an hour outside, teaching Thomas to properly set snares with wire and triggers that will yield more game with less effort. "I'll be back come spring," Henry promises, shouldering his pack. "These mountains get lonesome, even for those who choose them. Can't imagine they're any kinder to those who didn't choose, but found themselves here anyway." The words hang between them, acknowledging what Thomas hasn't said. After Henry disappears into the forest, Thomas stands in the clearing long after his footprints are the only evidence of the encounter. The supplies will help them survive until spring, but something else lingers: the complexity of human connection. Thomas fled to these mountains seeking escape, yet finds himself strangely comforted by the promise of Henry's return, by the knowledge that somewhere beyond their isolated clearing, someone knows they exist. Winter's grip finally loosens its hold on the mountain, retreating in stages rather than surrender. Snowdrifts shrink daily, revealing long-buried earth beneath, while meltwater carves temporary streams through the property, their gurgling voices a welcome change from winter's deep silence. Thomas and Rusty venture farther each day, rediscovering landmarks transformed by their months of confinement, the lightning-struck oak now draped with emerging buds, the boulder field where chipmunks emerge blinking from winter dens, the south-facing slope where green shoots push determinedly through thawing soil. Thomas's body has changed during these months of survival. His clothes, already too small when he arrived, now hang impossibly short at wrists and ankles. Hard physical labor has stripped away childhood softness, replacing it with wiry muscle and sinew. His hands, once smooth, now bear calluses that match the cabin's worn axe handle perfectly. Rusty, too, has transformed, his once mangy coat now thick and healthy, his movements around Thomas becoming almost prescient, anticipating needs before they're expressed, bringing specific tools during repairs as if understanding their purpose, herding small game toward Thomas's snares with calculated precision. Their partnership has transcended training into something deeper, a wordless communication born of absolute dependence on each other. Thomas turns soil in the expanded garden plot with renewed vigor, the earth rich and dark beneath his improvised tools. Henry's spring visit brought unexpected treasures. Packets of seeds carefully labeled in a shaky hand, corn, beans, potatoes, vegetables whose growing season aligns perfectly with mountain summers. The cabin itself stands transformed, its previous disrepair now largely corrected through Thomas's persistent efforts. Patched roof, chinked walls, properly functioning chimney, each improvement marking victory over entropy and abandonment. On a particularly warm afternoon, Thomas bathes in the stream, the water still achingly cold from mountain snowmelt, but tolerable in the strengthening Sunday. Bending to splash his face, he catches sight of his reflection in a calm pool and freezes, startled by the stranger staring back. Sun-browned skin stretched over sharpened cheekbones, serious eyes that seemed to belong to someone much older, a jagged scar visible on his leg where winter nearly claimed him. This face bears no resemblance to the soft-cheeked boy who fled a gas station nearly a year ago. With sudden confusion, Thomas realizes he's forgotten his own age, has to count backward through seasons to determine that he must now be 12. Though the knowledge feels meaningless against the reality of what he's become, not a child defined by years, but a survivor measured by capabilities, by challenges overcome, by a mountain homestead reclaimed from wilderness and neglect. Henry returns with the warming days, pack laden with supplies, and most precious of all, books with worn covers and dog-eared pages. Knowledge weighs nothing to carry, he explains, but makes the heaviest burdens lighter. Summer transforms into Thomas's schoolroom as he devours these unexpected treasures, practical guides to W.on. Wilderness survival, animal tracking, edible plants, and basic construction. Each evening finds him cross-legged by firelight, fingers tracing diagrams, lips moving silently over unfamiliar words that gradually become part of his expanding vocabulary. Days acquire purposeful rhythm as Henry visits weekly, teaching without prying into Thomas's past. The old mountaineer demonstrates proper smoking techniques that preserve meat for months rather than days, shows how overlapping shingles create truly watertight roof sections, identifies plants whose leaves and roots hold medicinal properties. Yellowroot tea for stomach ailments, Henry explains, digging carefully around the plant to expose golden tendrils. Steep it fresh, not too long, or the bitterness overwhelms the healing. Thomas absorbs everything, applying new knowledge immediately. His hands grow increasingly capable, mind sharpening through both practical application and academic understanding. Words once stumbled over in school, trajectory, circumference, germination, now form natural parts of his conversations with Henry, whose own formal education ended at 8th grade, but whose lifetime in these mountains constitutes a doctorate in practical wisdom. Even Rusty seems to expand his capabilities, watching intently during Henry's demonstrations of snare placement, then systematically herding small game toward these traps with calculated precision. The dog's intelligence blossoms with purpose, his behavior revealing problem-solving abilities that sometimes leave both Thomas and Henry watching in quiet amazement. The cabin transforms alongside its inhabitants. A proper sleeping platform, elevated off the floor, replaces Thomas's pallet, constructed from split logs with a mattress of pine boughs covered by deerskins. Henry helps tan. Shelves now line one wall, holding preserves from the expanding garden, jars of berries, dried beans, early vegetables stored according to methods detailed in Henry's books. A table fashioned from a split log provides dignified dining space where Thomas and Henry sometimes share meals, their conversations ranging from practical survival to philosophy, the old man treating Thomas's questions with thoughtful consideration rather than childish indulgence. In the evenings when Henry has departed and chores are complete, Thomas begins keeping his own journal, documenting their growing expertise in careful handwriting that improves with practice. He records successful techniques, failed experiments, observations about weather patterns and wildlife behavior, creating a record that mirrors the cabin's original owner's journals, but with his own unique insights. The boy who fled a gas station nearly a year ago exists only in memory now, replaced by a young person whose education has become as specialized as it is unconventional, less arithmetic and grammar. more celestial navigation and structural engineering, yet containing wisdom that transcends traditional schooling. The rotting floorboards near the hearth have troubled Thomas for weeks, sagging dangerously beneath his weight. On a rain-soaked afternoon when outside work proves impossible, he finally tackles the repair, prying up damaged planks with a crowbar salvaged from the shed. Rusty watches with unusual intensity as Thomas works, head tilted, occasionally whining when certain boards shift. The dog's behavior makes sense when Thomas's crowbar catches on something different, not rotted wood but a metal ring nestled between joists. "What's this, boy?" he whispers, excitement quickening his pulse as he clears debris around what appears to be a trapdoor. Rusty's tail wags once in confirmation. The door resists at first, swollen with decades of trapped moisture, then surrenders with a reluctant groan. Musty air rushes upward as Thomas peers into darkness, lowering his lantern to reveal a small storage space beneath the cabin. Inside, 3 metal trunks sit perfectly preserved, protected from the elements by careful waterproofing. Thomas descends cautiously, Rusty's anxious whines following from above. The first trunk contains books unlike any Thomas has seen, leather-bound volumes with gilt-edged pages, first editions according to their inscriptions, classics of literature and philosophy whose language challenges even his expanding vocabulary. The second holds carefully wrapped photographs and documents, university degrees bearing the name Jacob Wilson, military commendations, letters written in elegant script that speak of city life abandoned. The third trunk delivers the most startling discovery, a velvet pouch containing gold coins, their surfaces gleaming in the lantern light as if minted yesterday. Eagle emblems and dates from the early 1900s, suggesting value beyond their weight in precious metal. Thomas sifts through these treasures with growing understanding, piecing together fragments of Jacob Wilson's story. Not a simple mountain man, but a professor who retreated from society after losing his wife to illness, bringing his most precious possessions to this self-imposed exile. A particularly striking photograph shows a family, bearded father, smiling mother, 2 small children, standing proudly before the cabin when it was newly built, its roof straight, windows gleaming, a world away from the dilapidated shelter Thomas discovered. He searches the journals he's been reading for months, finding no mention of this hidden cache. Whatever drove Wilson to conceal these treasures, he kept the secret even from his private writings. Thomas carefully returns everything to its place, items arranged exactly as he found them, preserving this accidental museum of another man's life. Only one thing does he keep, a single gold coin slipped into his pocket, not for its monetary value but as talisman and connection to the cabin's past. Without articulating why, Thomas understands that what lies beneath the floor isn't truly his to claim, merely to safeguard. As he safeguards the cabin itself, temporary custodian rather than owner of this mountain legacy. Late summer brings the mountain's fury, storms that gather with frightening speed, transforming blue skies to violet black within minutes. Thomas learns to read the warning signs, a sudden hush in bird song, air pressure that makes his ears pop, the way Rusty paces anxiously hours before clouds appear. They've weathered several such tempests, but the August storm arrives with unprecedented violence. Lightning strikes so close that Thomas feels electricity prickle across his skin, thunder cracking instantaneously overhead with physical force that rattles the cabin's very foundation. Through rain, lashed windows, he watches helplessly as wind tears at his carefully constructed roof repairs. A particularly savage gust catches the northwestern corner, peeling back shingles and underlayment like the lid from a tin can. The sound of splintering wood rises above even the storm's roar as a section of roof disappears into the night. Rain pours through the gaping wound, instantly soaking everything beneath. "Rusty, help!" Thomas shouts, scrambling to move their most essential supplies, food stores, books, bedding, to the cabin's driest corner. The dog responds with uncanny understanding, dragging smaller items to safety while Thomas wrestles with heavier containers. Water cascades down interior walls, turning the earthen floor to mud as they work desperately in the downpour, guided only by intermittent lightning flashes. By dawn, the storm retreats, leaving devastation in its wake. Thomas stands amid the wreckage, surveying damage that threatens months of progress, soaked bedding, waterlogged supplies, a partially collapsed wall where water undermined its foundation. The sight overwhelms him completely. For the first time since winter's darkest days, Thomas sinks to his knees and weeps, shoulders shaking with exhaustion and despair. His face buries itself in Rusty's damp fur, fingers clutching the dog's coat, as if it might anchor him against this new tide of abandonment. The universe itself, seemingly determined to strip away everything he builds. Rusty remains steadfast, pressing against Thomas's trembling form, occasionally nudging him with a cold nose or gentle paw. The dog's eyes hold a wisdom beyond explanation, somehow communicating that all is not lost, that they have overcome worse together. When Thomas's tears finally subside, Rusty pulls away, retrieving a fallen hammer from beneath debris, a silent signal that work awaits, that rebuilding begins now. They salvage what materials they can, creating piles of still useful lumber, nails pulled straight, tools wiped clean of mud. Henry arrives unexpectedly by mid-morning, having seen the storm's path and worried for their safety. Without comment on Thomas's red-rimmed eyes, he sets down his pack and immediately begins assessing damage. Is red-rimmed as ridge-rimmed, prioritizing repairs with the efficiency of someone who has rebuilt after disaster many times before. For 3 days they work from dawn until darkness forces them to stop, Henry showing Thomas techniques for stronger joints, weather-resistant seams, proper bracing against wind. What emerges isn't merely repair but improvement. A roof pitched more steeply to shed future downpours, walls reinforced at vulnerable points, a drainage system to channel water away from the foundation. The storm's destruction, Thomas realizes as they work, has provided unexpected opportunity, a chance to rebuild stronger, more deliberately, with knowledge he didn't possess during his initial desperate repairs. Autumn paints the forest in crimson and gold, but brings a different danger: human intrusion. Thomas is gathering fallen branches for winter firewood when Rusty freezes beside him, hackles raised, a growl so low it's felt rather than heard. The dog's eyes fix on something through dense underbrush, his body trembling with unusual urgency. Thomas drops silently to his knees, Years of wilderness, living having taught him to trust Rusty's senses without question. Through gaps in autumn foliage, he sees the stranger, a man in expensive camouflage gear, methodically setting metal traps along the game trail that winds through what Thomas now considers their territory. The hunter moves with practiced efficiency, carrying a high-powered rifle with telescopic sight across his back, occasionally speaking into a hand-held radio. Each word sends cold fear through Thomas's veins, not of the man himself, but what his presence represents. Questions about a child living alone. Reports to authorities. Separation from Rusty, from the life they've built, from the freedom Thomas has discovered in this mountain sanctuary. They remain frozen until the hunter departs, Rusty's muscles rigid beneath Thomas's restraining hand. For days afterward, Thomas maintains vigilant watch, venturing from the cabin only when absolutely necessary, keeping to dense underbrush when movement is unavoidable. Rusty develops new patterns circling their clearing at dawn and dusk, pausing at specific points as if establishing a perimeter that must be defended. During cautious explorations, Thomas discovers and carefully disables each of the hunter's traps, relocating them far beyond their territory, not destroying another man's livelihood, merely protecting their own safety. At night, Thomas reads his journals by candlelight with new purpose, devising defenses against future intrusions. He creates early warning systems from materials at hand, strategically placed twigs across trails that snap underfoot with distinctive cracks, threads strung with small bells between trees at unlikely angles, arrangements of stones that would appear natural to most observers, but whose disturbance would be immediately apparent to someone who set them. Henry notices these changes during his next visit, observing Thomas's heightened vigilance without comment until they sit before the evening fire. "First time you've had to protect something that matters," the old man observes quietly. "Changes how you see these mountains, doesn't it?" Thomas nods, understanding spreading through him like ripples across still water. The forest that once represented pure freedom now holds potential threat. The isolation that provided safety now feels precarious. Their paradise has been touched by outside awareness, transforming it irrevocably. That night, after Henry departs, Thomas stands in the clearing beneath star-filled skies, listening to night sounds with new alertness. Rusty beside him maintains similar vigil, both of them changed by knowledge they cannot unlearn. Innocence has given way to watchfulness, the price of having something precious enough to lose. Spring arrives earlier than the previous year, snowmelt revealing green shoots weeks before Thomas expected them. The forest awakens with renewed vigor, birds returning to established territories, deer venturing closer to the cabin with newfound boldness, wildflowers carpeting south-facing slopes in brilliant purples and yellows. As Thomas and Rusty assess winter's damage and begin planning summer's improvements, Henry arrives with news that changes everything. "My bones can't take these mountains anymore," he explains, hands cupping steaming coffee in Thomas's handmade mug. "Daughter in Tennessee's been after me to move down," finally said yes. Thomas nods, throat suddenly tight with unexpected loss. Henry sets his mug down carefully, eyes meeting Thomas's with unusual directness. "Been thinking on what happens to you. Got two paths forward as I see it. The proposal comes without preamble. Thomas could come with him to Tennessee, where Henry would arrange proper schooling, legal guardianship, through connections who don't ask uncomfortable questions, a conventional future with security and opportunity. Or Thomas could remain in the mountains with Henry's blessing, receiving occasional supply deliveries from trusted friends who would maintain the fiction of a reclusive uncle. The decision torments Thomas for days after Henry departs, leaving him time to consider. He moves through daily tasks mechanically, mind churning with possibilities and consequences. Civilization represents security, regular meals, proper medical care, education that might open doors beyond these mountains. But it also means painful reminders of abandonment, potential separation from Rusty if guardians don't accept a half-wild dog, surrender of the independence he's fought so desperately to establish. The mountain offers continued freedom, days structured by necessity rather than clocks, decisions made without interference, the partnership with Rusty that has become fundamental to his existence. But it also means isolation, the endless challenges of self-sufficiency, an uncertain future should illness or injury strike beyond his capabilities to manage. On the decision's third day, Thomas hikes to the highest nearby ridge, Rusty faithfully at his side. From this vantage point, he can see the vastness of his chosen home, mountain ridges folding into blue distance, the valley where their cabin stands beside its silver thread of stream, forest canopy stretching unbroken in all directions. Thomas sits on sun-warmed stone, Rusty pressed against his side, watching clouds cast shadows that race across slopes and valleys. The decision crystallizes not through conscious thought, but through feeling that rises from some deeper place than words can reach. This mountain, this cabin, this life beside Rusty has become more home than any place before, not merely shelter, but identity. Not just survival, but purpose. Whatever challenges lie ahead, Thomas realizes with sudden clarity, they belong here. This decision, unlike his abandonment, is fully his own. With Henry's departure imminent, Thomas accepts certain compromises necessary for continued mountain existence. Over several carefully planned trips, Henry introduces him to a small network of trusted residents scattered across remote hollows and ridgelines, people whose own independence inclines them toward respecting residents, others' privacy. Dr. Marlowe, a silver-haired physician whose mountain practice operates largely on barter, examines Thomas's lingering cough without asking questions that can't be answered. The Whitakers, an elderly couple whose homestead sits where dirt road surrenders to wilderness, agree to receive occasional mail and hold supplies with no curiosity beyond weather patterns and garden yields. Samuel Keller, a carpenter whose hands speak more eloquently than his sparse words, begins trading knowledge for Thomas's increasingly skilled assistance with local projects, teaching joinery techniques that transform Thomas's repairs from functional to craftsmanlike. For these necessary interactions, Thomas constructs a careful persona, orphaned, living with a reclusive uncle whose poor health and suspicious nature keep him perpetually absent during visits. His education handled through homeschooling that explains both his intelligence and unusual knowledge gaps. The story, delivered with just enough detail to satisfy without inviting deeper questioning, proves plausible to mountain folks who understand choosing distance from conventional society. Thomas approaches these new connections with calculated wariness, revealing only what serves immediate needs, gauging each person's trustworthiness through multiple encounters before allowing even minimal dependency. Rusty adapts to these cautious forays into wider society with characteristic intelligence, his behavior shifting subtly depending on company, remaining alertly protective when strangers approach, relaxing marginally around proven allies like Dr. Marlowe, yet always positioning himself between Thomas and potential threat. The dog's instincts prove remarkably accurate in assessing character. His hackles rising once when a store clerk's questions grew too specific about Thomas's living situation, providing warning that prevented future visits. Their world expands through these careful connections, access to medicines, books, tools, and knowledge impossible to generate in isolation. Yet Thomas maintains vigilant boundaries that protect the sanctuary they've built. He learns to time visits to minimize exposure, to deflect probing questions with carefully prepared responses, to balance necessary interaction against dangerous visibility. The cabin remains their true home, the forest their genuine community. But these limited human connections provide crucial resources while maintaining necessary distance from authorities who would separate them. This delicate balance, neither complete isolation nor full integration, creates a middle path where Thomas can access civilization's benefits without surrendering to its constraints, a freedom purchased through careful compromise rather than total rejection of human society. 3 years after their arrival, the cabin's surroundings bear little resemblance to the tangled wilderness Thomas and Rusty first encountered. The overgrown clearing has transformed into a carefully organized landscape, where functionality and beauty merge with quiet purpose. Thomas has expanded the garden methodically each season, applying knowledge gleaned from borrowed agricultural texts, creating a productive plot that provides year-round sustenance. Raised beds built from salvaged lumber follow the sun's arc across the clearing, each positioned to maximize light during critical growing periods. Cold frames constructed from window sashes rescued from abandoned homesteads extend the growing season by weeks on either end, allowing tender seedlings to develop before final frost and protecting late vegetables well into autumn's chill. Fruit trees, apple, pear, and plum saplings transplanted during dormant winter months from neglected properties, Henry identified, now stand in orderly rows, their branches beginning to bear modest harvests that Thomas preserves carefully for winter provisions. The garden has become Thomas's laboratory as much as his pantry. He experiments constantly, testing natural fertilizers created from forest materials, implementing crop rotation based on soil depletion patterns, saving seeds from his most successful plants to strengthen their adaptation to this specific mountain environment. His journal now contains detailed observations about germination rates, frost resistance, pest vulnerabilities, becoming a self-taught botanist through necessity that has evolved into genuine scientific curiosity. Rusty has developed his own garden relationship, somehow understanding which newly planted areas require delicate treatment, which pests to chase from vulnerable seedlings, when to alert Thomas to approaching deer with warning barks that protect months of work. The dog patrols the perimeter with proprietorial vigilance, yet moves between established plants with surprising gentleness, as if comprehending the difference between wilderness and cultivation. The transformation from desperate survival to sustainable living manifests most visibly in this flourishing space. What began as frantic scratching in soil for immediate food has evolved into long-term planning that considers seasons beyond the current one, perennial herbs established. In protected corners, berry bushes positioned where their morning shade won't interfere with sun-loving vegetables, paths arranged for efficient harvesting with minimal soil compaction. Thomas's deepening connection to this land reveals itself in every carefully tended row, in the compost system that returns nutrients to soil that feeds him, in the rainwater collection that sustains plants during dry periods. His hands, now calloused in patterns specific to gardening tools, move with practiced confidence through tasks that once seemed insurmountable. The boy who arrived knowing nothing of growing food now reads weather patterns in cloud formations, predicts frost by subtle shifts in air pressure, understands this mountain's particular rhythms with intimacy that no textbook could provide. Thomas's 15th birthday, marked by careful notches on a cabin beam rather than candles or cards, coincides with completion of his most ambitious project. The cabin's second room, once a cluttered storage space for the original owner's abandoned possessions, now stands transformed into a proper library. Shelves crafted from split logs line walls from floor to ceiling, their surfaces sanded smooth through hours of patient labor, each board fitted with joinery techniques learned from Samuel Keller. These shelves hold Thomas's most precious possessions, books accumulated through careful trades, garden produce for tattered paperbacks, monthly packages still arriving from Henry's Tennessee home, volumes salvaged from abandoned properties during exploratory hikes. The collection grows slowly but purposefully, each edition representing specific knowledge rather than random acquisition. Thomas organizes them with meticulous precision, practical references, agriculture, construction, medicine, occupy shelves nearest the door for quick consultation. Literature fills the wall beneath the room's single window, where afternoon light provides ideal reading conditions. History and science texts stand together in categories that would baffle conventional librarians, but make perfect sense to Thomas's self-directed education. A reading chair fashioned from bent branches, padded with deerskin, sits beside the restored stone fireplace, positioned to catch optimal light in all seasons. Here, Thomas spends every evening after chores, his education progressing through dedicated daily reading that has become ritual rather than obligation. Words that once required painful deciphering now flow effortlessly into meaning. Concepts that would challenge students his age in formal schools have become familiar through persistent study. Scientific principles, historical movements, philosophical ideas, all absorbed without curriculum or instruction beyond his own curiosity. Mathematical problems once incomprehensible now yield to solutions worked through on salvaged paper. His vocabulary expands beyond what most adults command, drawn from centuries of literature rather than contemporary usage. In this sanctuary of knowledge, firelight dancing on log walls as winter winds howl outside, Thomas reads aloud to Rusty, who listens with apparent fascination. Head tilted, eyes following Thomas's expressions as carefully as children might track a storyteller's performance. Together they travel to ancient Rome through Caesar's commentaries, explore Arctic waters with Shackleton's expeditions, unravel DNA's double helix alongside Watson and Crick, The mountain isolation that might have limited another child's development has instead created focused opportunity for intellectual growth, unconstrained by standardized expectations or social distractions. Through books, their remote cabin transforms each evening into a window opening upon the entire world, past and present, science and art, for a remote window. And of pastimes, and art, and of pasti, present, reality and imagination, accessible through printed pages that require no electricity, no permission, no credentials beyond the willingness to engage with ideas across centuries and continents. Mid-autumn brings crisis without warning. Thomas and Rusty hunt together on a clear morning, working familiar patterns developed over years of partnership, the dog flushing game toward Thomas's waiting snares, each understanding their role without commands. They separate briefly when Rusty catches an unfamiliar scent, Thomas continuing along the ridge while the dog investigates the valley below. Only when an hour passes without Rusty's return does worry begin. By midday, concern transforms to fear. Thomas abandons his hunting, calling Rusty's name with increasing desperation, voice echoing unanswered between mountain slopes. Hours of searching yield nothing as darkness falls, forcing Thomas back to the cabin alone, hoping Rusty might somehow find his way home in the night. Sleep proves impossible, Thomas checking the clearing repeatedly by lantern light, calling until his voice grows hoarse. Dawn brings renewed searching, expanding in concentric circles from their last point of contact. For 3 days, Thomas barely sleeps, ranging farther from the cabin than ever before, pushing deeper into unfamiliar territory, while dread grows like a physical weight in his chest. On the 4th morning, movement at the clearing's edge draws Thomas from fitful sleep. Rusty, barely recognizable, drags himself home on 3 legs. The 4th mangled in what appears to be an illegal trap, its metal teeth still clamped around bloody flesh. The reunion's joy dissolves into horror as Thomas assesses the damage: torn muscle, exposed bone, infection already evident in swollen tissue, and the fever heat radiating from Rusty's trembling body. Despite Thomas's best efforts with limited medical knowledge, cleaning the wound with boiled water, applying herbal poultices learned from Henry, fashioning a splint from stripped bark, Rusty's condition deteriorates rapidly. Infection spreads visibly up the leg. Fever spikes until the dog's eyes grow glassy and unresponsive, his breathing shallow and rapid. On the 6th day, facing Rusty's imminent death, Thomas makes an agonizing decision that risks everything they've built. Before dawn, he wraps Rusty in their warmest blankets, secures him in a carrying harness fashioned from deerskin, and begins the journey to civilization. For 8 grueling hours, Thomas hikes toward Dr. Mitchell's remote clinic, his body straining under Rusty's weight, stopping only to drip water into the dog's unresponsive mouth. Each step represents potential exposure, questions about a boy alone, authorities who might separate them permanently, yet Thomas continues without hesitation, understanding that Rusty's life matters more than their hidden existence. Doctor, Mitchell asks no questions when Thomas arrives, face gaunt with exhaustion and fear. The physician treats Rusty's wounds with proper medical care, cleaning damaged tissue, administering antibiotics. teaching Thomas aftercare procedures with clinical precision. As Rusty sleeps under sedation, Dr. Mitchell addresses the unspoken reality. Isolation has its freedoms, but limitations too. Some things can't be handled alone. The words settle into Thomas with uncomfortable truth. Their carefully constructed self-sufficiency, their independence from the world's systems and expectations, contains vulnerabilities no amount of preparation can eliminate. Their survival, he realizes while watching Rusty's chest rise and fall with medicated sleep, ultimately depends on connections they've tried so hard to avoid. Nearly 6 years after their arrival, the cabin bears little resemblance to the abandoned structure they discovered that stormy afternoon. Thomas stands in the clearing, now 17, his frame stretched to nearly 6 feet, shoulders broadened by years of physical labor, hands permanently calloused from tools that have become extensions of himself rather than awkward implements. His face, once soft with childhood, has sharpened into angular planes beneath sun-darkened skin, eyes holding the quiet confidence of someone who has built a life entirely through his own efforts. The cabin stands transformed alongside its inhabitant, roof completely rebuilt with proper pitch and overlapping shingles, walls reinforced and insulated with clay-straw mixtures, windows restored with actual glass panes acquired through odd jobs for mountain residents who never question why a teenager works without adult supervision. Solar panels salvaged from an abandoned research station on the mountain's western slope provide limited electricity for essential needs, evening light, occasional radio for weather reports, battery charging for tools Thomas has gradually accumulated. The interior balances rustic functionality with unexpected refinement that would astonish anyone who had seen the rotting structure years earlier. Hand-carved furniture shaped from local hardwoods displays craftsmanship beyond Thomas's years, chairs with perfectly fitted joints, a table whose surface gleams from countless oilings, a bed frame that no longer creaks with every movement. Shelves line every available wall, holding books organized by subject, jars of preserved foods arranged by season and type, tools hanging in precise order according to frequency of use. Walls once bare except for cobwebs now display Thomas's surprisingly skilled drawings documenting their mountain life, detailed botanical studies of plants that sustain them, landscapes capturing seasonal transformations, portraits of Rusty in various poses of alertness or repose. The dog himself has aged alongside Thomas, gray now touching his muzzle and chest, his movements more deliberate since the injury that nearly claimed him. Yet Rusty maintains vigilant guardianship of their domain, patrolling established boundaries each morning and evening, positioning himself at Thomas's side during all significant tasks, with the steady presence that has anchored the boy through every hardship. The transformation extends beyond physical structures or bodies. Thomas has built not merely shelter, but a true home. A place belonging to him through creation rather than inheritance or purchase. His understanding of self has evolved similarly. The abandoned child who fled a gas station 6 years earlier no longer exists except in occasional dreams that grow less frequent with each passing season. His abandonment no longer defines his existence but merely explains its beginning. the first chapter in a story whose subsequent pages he has written entirely himself, through determination and adaptability that transformed desperate survival into purposeful living. A young woman appears in the clearing one summer afternoon, clipboard in hand, the unexpected sight freezing Thomas mid-task. She wears the unmistakable olive-green uniform of the Forestry Service, hiking boots dusty from miles of mountain terrain. Thomas sets down his gardening tools slowly, Rusty positioning himself between them with watchful alertness that lacks outright hostility. "Hello there," she calls, her voice carrying professional friendliness. "I'm Emma Miller, State Forestry Service. We're surveying properties in this previously unmapped section." Thomas maintains careful composure, despite the alarm coursing through him. 6 years of rehearsed explanations emerge smoothly. He lives with his uncle, who's currently checking trap lines, has been here most of his life, learns through homeschooling. Emma nods, making notes, her expression suggesting neither complete belief nor outright skepticism. Her gaze travels across the property, taking in the meticulously maintained garden, solar panels, rainwater collection system. "This is impressive," she acknowledges, professional assessment giving way to genuine admiration. Most established homesteaders don't achieve this level of sustainability. She moves through her survey methodically, documenting the structures, asking questions about water usage that Thomas answers with knowledge that clearly exceeds her expectations. Rusty follows their movement with unwavering attention, remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. When Emma kneels to examine the garden's irrigation system, she notices the dog's distinctive appearance, the torn ear, the specific pattern of his coat, the slight favor he shows his previously injured leg. "You know," she says carefully, rising to her feet, "there was a report years back. Missing boy, 11 or 12. Accompanied by a dog matching this one's description. The moment balances on a knife's edge. Thomas feels possibilities diverging before him. Denial, flight, confession, each carrying consequences that could destroy everything he's built. Instead, he offers a tour of their composting system, demonstrating his comprehensive understanding of decomposition cycles, soil enrichment patterns, seasonal adjustments. His knowledge flows with practiced confidence, hands gesturing toward mountain slopes as he explains watershed patterns, forest succession stages, fire management practices. Something unspoken passes between them during this impromptu education, recognition that his presence here represents something worth protecting rather than disrupting. Emma's questions shift subtly, becoming genuine curiosity rather than official documentation. Before leaving, she hands Thomas a card with her contact information. "For any environmental concerns you might observe," she explains, though her gaze communicates deeper understanding. "This area doesn't get regular patrols. Probably won't see another forestry worker for years." Thomas watches her disappear down the trail, card clutched in his hand. Understanding the gift she's given, acknowledgement without intervention, recognition without disruption. For the first time, he contemplates how his future might eventually include carefully chosen human connections beyond their mountain sanctuary, relationships based on mutual respect rather than deception or fear. 7 years after his abandonment, 18-year-old Thomas sits on the cabin's porch. Golden evening light, washing over weathered boards that bear the marks of his patient restoration. His calloused fingers rest lightly on Rusty's head, the dog's once vibrant coat now threaded with gray that catches the fading sunlight. Despite his advancing years, Rusty maintains the alert watchfulness that has kept them both alive through 7 mountain seasons, his good ear still twitching at distant sounds beyond human perception. Together they watch as sunset paints the ridgelines in breathtaking amber hues, transforming ordinary stone and forest into something approaching the divine. The clearing around them tells their story more eloquently than words. Garden plots arranged in careful rows now yielding their summer bounty. Fruit trees heavy with ripening apples and pears. Structures built and repaired by hands that have grown from a child's uncertain grasp to a man's confident skill. Every corner of their domain bears evidence of patient craftsmanship, problems solved through ingenuity rather than purchased solutions, beauty emerging alongside functionality through years of dedicated effort. Thomas's mind drifts backward through their journey, that first desperate flight from the gas station, nights huddled beneath inadequate shelter, the miraculous discovery of this forgotten cabin that offered possibility amid desolation. He remembers the boy he was, frightened, abandoned, believing himself entirely alone until Rusty appeared like an answer to unspoken prayer. That child exists now only in memory, replaced by a young man whose identity has been forged through challenge rather than given by circumstance. The mountain has provided not merely shelter but purpose, teaching self-reliance through necessity, resilience through hardship, wisdom through direct consequence rather than second-hand instruction. In his palm rests tangible proof of this transformation, the deed to the property, recently secured through careful legal maneuvering with help from sympathetic mountain residents who understand chosen isolation. The single gold coin from beneath the floorboards, kept as talisman through years of uncertainty, has been exchanged for legitimate ownership, transforming squatter to proprietor through paperwork that acknowledges what his labor has already proven. Their future stretches before them, uncertain yet full of possibility. The isolation that once represented safety might gradually yield to carefully chosen connections. Emma, from the Forestry Service, whose understanding eyes promised discretion, Doctor. Mitchell, whose medical knowledge might be shared through apprenticeship. Communities of like-minded individuals living deliberately in these mountains. What began as desperate refuge has evolved into sacred sanctuary, a place created rather than merely occupied, belonging earned through transformation rather than granted by others. Thomas scratches behind Rusty's good ear, the dog leaning into his touch with the perfect trust that has defined their relationship from its beginning. "We aren't just surviving anymore, boy," he murmurs, words that summarize their shared journey with simple eloquence. "We're home,